Constitution Party of West Virginia is concerned about the recent job cuts at the Bureau of the Fiscal Service in Parkersburg. Around 80 probationary workers are confirmed to have been let go from the Bureau last week. Constitution Party member Chad Conley says he's concerned about the job losses because the Bureau is a major employer in Parkersburg that boosts the local economy. Conley says having dozens of people suddenly losing their jobs hurts not that just directly those affected, but also the downtown businesses that those Fiscal Service employees could have patronized.
A lot of businesses depend on the workers at the Bureau of Fiscal Services, and it's going to negatively impact them. It's going to turn people's lives upside down unexpectedly. A lot of folks, husband and wife, both work at the Fiscal Service, and if they both lost their job, and they're going to have to completely change their lifestyle.
Connolly says, though, he's generally supportive of reducing the size of the federal government. He's concerned about what he calls a lack of due diligence in the decision-making around these job cuts. He says he'd like to see more action from West Virginia's elected officials at the state and federal level to protect jobs.